as parliamentarians and parties that represent the Northeast, an area that has been affected by war for a period of over 35 years, an area that has that has been subjected to an economic embargo, almost a blanket embargo that stifled growth, stifled economic growth, where when you have a situation where the war has come to an end, for the Northeast to not be recognized as a especially vulnerable area, and for the Northeast people's economy not to be protected initially, but instead to be allowed to compete with the rest of the country on a so-called equal footing would be a grave disadvantage, because those people in the Northeast at every level are in fact literally a good 30 years behind. And so we have, and this is not something that we have been advocating recently, in fact since 2009 onwards, we have been repeatedly stating that whichever government must take this approach. And if they had taken it early, say for a period of about 5 years, by declaring the Northeast a war-affected area and having special considerations for the Northeast, then we could have come out of that. And in fact, today, the Northeast people could also be expected to compete with the rest of the country on an equal footing. But that never happened. During the Mahinda Rajapaksa era, very unfortunately, there was no consideration of the Northeast at all. On the contrary, it was cronyism. So you had members of parliament that represented the Northeast that were loyal to that government, that were doled out a few hundred million, and in order for them to sort of secure their vote bank, they pretended as if they were doing some sort of development work. When the Ranil Wickremesinghe Maithripala Sirisena government came into power in 2015, you had from the opposition, the TNA, giving them more or less unconditional support. And despite that, when the budgets were presented, again, the Northeast was completely silent. There was nothing about the Northeast in those budgets. And when pressure mounted, the government, I presume the TNA would have brought about some pressure to get something cleared, because they found that they couldn't go back and face the electorate. Then the then government made announcements saying that the Northeast has not been specifically mentioned because the government plans to have an international conference of donors in order to raise funds for the development of the Northeast. Now, sir, from 2015 right up to 2020, except for that 52 days of some sort of incident that took place of somewhat of a constitutional coup, the Maithripala Sirisena Ranil Wickremesinghe government was in power, but no such effort of having an international donors conference for the war-affected Northeast ever took place. And except for the meager doling out of some millions to their relevant supporters, including the TNA, nothing substantial ever happened. So this budget now, we are facing this budget in a scenario where the Northeast people have been affected by over 30 years of war. They are at a terrible disadvantage. Then you had Corona, which basically made things far, far worse. And now with this current economic crisis, I don't think Honourable Deputy Speaker, it's an exaggeration to say that the people of the Northeast are in probably the worst scenario when compared to the whole country. So it is in that backdrop that we have to look at this current budget. Now, sir, when you look at that backdrop of the Northeast being terribly lagging behind, the budget this time, unlike in the previous occasions, over 15 years, unlike over the last 15 years, this time has in fact specifically spoken about allocations to the Northeast. So that is, in principle, we must welcome that. The fact that there has been some sort of effort to talk about the Northeast. This time, unlike all previous occasions, no question of raising funds from an international donors conference and all of that, because there is no chance of that happening. So we have some allocations. What is the allocation? The allocations for the Northeast is for Punahari development. The government has allocated 500 million. Then for Paliyara river scheme, that is to try and bring in usable water, drinking water, and also for other purposes, because the salinity problem in the north is there. 250 million has been allocated. For housing schemes, 2.5 billion has been allocated. And then for the families of the disappeared, I presume through the Office of Missing Persons, 1 billion has been allocated in addition to 1.5 that had been previously allocated. So a total in this budget, a total allocation for the Northeast specifically is 4.25 billion. That is, Honourable Presiding Member, if you take the whole budget, it is 0.1%. 0.1% of special allocations for an area that we all know is war affected, that is lagging almost 30 years behind, that is development is being stifled in the form of a military presence that is all oppressive, a ratio of 1:4 in the Vanni and 1:10, between 1:10 to 1:14 in Jaffna. Out of 20 divisions of the Sri Lanka's military, you have 16 based in the Northeast, of which 14 are based in the North. So those are the circumstances in which only 0.1% of the specifically mentioned allocations for the Northeast has been made. Now, sir, that clearly shows what mindset the Minister of Finance is in and the President is in. Another important matter that I want to mention is that this President, soon after he took office, has been carrying out a drama, making out that he is going to find a negotiated solution. He has had all-party conferences. Our party refused to go because we knew that it was a sham, and we refused to take part. But then all the other Tamil parties seated here have been taking part. And even before the talks commenced, the President announced that the solution is the implementation of the 13th Amendment. Implementation of the 13th Amendment minus police and land powers. Now, sir, when you have said that the implementation of the 13th Amendment which is the provincial councils, and in the case of the Northeast, it is the North and the Eastern provincial councils, one would assume then that in a war-affected area, that at least to the provincial councils, there will be significant allocations. At least to the provincial councils. But for the northern provincial councils, which is the most war-affected area, only 1% has been allocated, and to the eastern province, 1.17% of all the allocations. The northern province, Honorable Presiding Member, is one before the last in the allocations. Uva is, I think, the last. So even when the President says that the ethnic problem is going to be resolved through the provincial councils, 13th Amendment, his allocations for a war-affected, unlike all other areas, a war-affected area is one of the least that he has made. One of the least he has made. And then, of course, we have to also understand whether in fact these allocations are going to be true. Honorable Presiding Member, you are aware that Fitch, that downgraded Sri Lanka 2 years ago, which now we all know has been an accurate downgrading because of the situation the country is facing, after this budget came out, has said this, has voiced concern over the government's fiscal targets as being ambitious, challenging to meet, and having a high degree of risk in implementation. In a statement, I'm finishing. I was given 15 minutes, sir. I don't think I have spoken for 15 minutes. And so under these circumstances, when the budgetary proposals are seen as ambitious, even these meager allocations for the Northeast, in reality, will most likely never be implemented. So that is the situation in which we find ourselves. I will obviously, under the committee stage, under each ministry, I will be dealing much more in detail in elaborating the complete discrimination that has been meted out to the Northeast, particularly the Tamil people. For those reasons and much more, we will be voting against this budget.